we've come to our next session. It's a session I'm excited to talk about because I love food. And joining me on stage to talk about this particular subject, please welcome to stage the Master Chef Asia and Singapore Judge, Cook, Author, Ms. Audra Morris, as well as Strategic Director, UNESCO Creative Cities Network, Kuching, City of Gastronomy, Ms. Karen Shepard. A big round of applause for my panelists. Wherever you like. Well, thank you very much for both of you for joining us here today. Well, I'll give you guys each a minute just to introduce yourself and what you do, and then we'll get right to the questions. So, Karen?
Shall I go first? Thank you. So some of you may know me because I am actually based here in Kuching, and I believe I met several of the delegates on Wednesday at Telengusan on the culinary track. My name is Karen Shepard. Kuching became Malaysia's first city of gastronomy under the Creative Cities Network. That was in October 2021. And so I was involved in the application and have been taking the project forward for the first year. So that's really me. Obviously, sorry, I failed to mention, we became a city of gastronomy in this particular network at one of 7 creative fields. So Kuching has a profile in Malaysia currently as a gastronomic capital.
I'm sure many of our delegates have experienced some of the gastronomy offerings that Kuching has to offer. Audra?
So I'm a cook. At the end of the day, I'm a cook. I cook, I feed people. I do it in a number of different ways. I also taste a lot of food. So I run a catering business. I do a lot of private dining in Australia, showcasing Singaporean cuisine, cuisine of my heritage. My mother's Indian, my mother's not Indian. She's Chinese from Kuching, and my father's Indian, so a lot of that. I also am very honored to be the Sustainable Gastronomic Tourism Ambassador for PATA, so I talk food. And I judge on MasterChef Singapore, so I taste a lot of food. Not all of it is good. And I'm very passionate about introducing the subject of authenticity to young children or young people.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So let's just jump right into the questions. We will have Q&A, so if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them. I might as well put it up now, because when I put it up yesterday, you guys only submitted your questions with 3 minutes left. So let's put it up now, so you can submit your questions now, and I can be able to get through all of them by the end of this session. So my team can get that up at some point. The first question I have, what are the social and economic impacts of gastronomy tourism beyond the immediate farm-to-table chain?
Should I go?
Yes,
Yep.
I'll go, and we can tag team it a little bit, I think.
Easily.
I mean, to me, gastronomy tourism, certainly here in Sarawak, is, as a general concept, is quite new. I mean, obviously, people eat constantly in Sarawak, but I think the idea of this farm-to-table concept for tourists is growing. In terms of the Creative Cities Network, they really see tourism, responsible tourism, as a driver for sustainable development. So for us, it is divided into 2 areas. In terms of our urban eating part, our urban F&B sector, we're really looking at it being a massive employer, and an employer for a huge range of different people of different social backgrounds and demographics. So in that sense, it's really a driver economically and socially. In terms of our rural sector, this is where we're developing new tours under the Creative Cities Network, really looking at the food chain. It changes the way I think the food chain is seen in an urban environment. I think sometimes there's an idea that the things that you're familiar with, you have the least interest in. And when you get gastronomic tourism coming in and people coming from outside and being interested in what you're doing in your traditional gastronomic sector, it creates that upswell of interest in it, both locally and internationally. And so I think that's one of the great impacts that we've seen. Our domestic stakeholders are suddenly fascinated by our gastronomy. As a concept, I mean, we've always been interested in our food, but this idea of gastronomy as being a driver for us, this is now highlighted. And for local people, this new awareness of how amazing our food is in an international context, the way it's viewed by international visitors and by even something like a UNESCO recognition, that has changed the sustainability of our traditional gastronomy sector going forward in terms of youth coming into the market, wanting to experiment with our traditional ingredients, wanting to learn more about the food that their grandparents made, for example. So the impact is massive, socially, economically, and environmentally.
I'm totally with Karen, because I think, farm to table, it's actually not a new concept. It's something that our ancestors used to do. If I talk about the way my mother used to, when she grew up in Kuching, my grandfather was a timber merchant. So they used to actually go to Miri all the time. They used to work alongside the indigenous tribes who worked with them, because they knew the lay of the land, and they knew how to log, they knew how to transport logs from upstream, downstream. Then lunchtime came, and my mother watched with eyes wide open on how the Dayaks used to cook, because that was, you're deep in jungle, there's no way you can travel all the way out to find a cafe somewhere. So there was a lot of that. So they learned from a very young age. I think somewhere along the way, the world kind of got lost in this world of globalization and capitalization and brandings and fast food. And fast food can be a real killer. And I mean, I love the concept of slow food, but also I get fast food. However, I think we're coming back to it now. You talk about the both social and economic impacts of farm to table. I did a little guest lecture at UCSI yesterday to a number of first-year students. The subject was destination marketing. And sorry, I know I'm going a bit off track, but there's a point to this. And I asked a lot of them about the traditional ingredients that their families cook here, right? And they had no idea. They had absolutely no idea. And I just felt that, they are the future. And I always view Gen Zs as the game changers, the people who are going to change life and change processes. And so for me, it's so important that I fed that into their minds, So we did a little a mind map, and we started with food, because food is me. And I said, guys, I'm here to talk about food, so let's just work with me. And so we had food, and we mind mapped it out. And before you know it, we had Dave, who was a student from Bangladesh. He came in and he wanted to own a restaurant, and so he was up there. And then Dave had to buy some vegetables, and so we had Jong deciding that he wanted to be a farmer, planting a whole series of crops. But there was a complexity there, because Dave decided, I really want to grow vegetables. I really want to have access to vegetables. That is a big part of my culture. Can you help me with that? So Jong goes, yes, definitely, let me know. And then, we explored this world of a whole series of business and an ecosystem that was built around food, and how it impacted economically, how everyone benefited financially from this. And everyone also socially had the sense of pride with where they were from and what the land provided. And it was phenomenal. The kids just absolutely loved it. That's and, great. They'd never been exposed to this before. So I think, we might move into this a bit later, but these guys are our future, and there is so much to be gained from just food and gastronomy. Well, gastronomy is food and culture, isn't it?
No, fantastic. I didn't realize that you had the chance to go speak to the kids. So it was a great time, right? So I'm talking about educational, but how can educational initiatives and awareness campaigns help in promoting the values and benefits of gastronomy tourism?
Well, I know this is a favorite topic of yours, so I'll get my answer in first. I mean, I think there's something about gastronomy tourism particularly. I think the whole experience is an educational process, and it invites to the kind of visitors who are interested in that educational, experiential tourism sector, effectively. So, I mean, I think for the visitors and also for the participants in it, the local participants, there's a knowledge exchange that goes on throughout the entire process. So, well, you know, I think that's really the benefit of it in terms of people sharing their experience from their own countries as to how farming, agriculture, how food is perceived and how our food chain is implemented in different countries around the world, and that's invaluable to both sides. I mean, I think I'll let Audra take this one away because I think she'll talk more about education.
I think, you know, we talk about education, it's from both perspectives. It's from a supplier's perspective and it's also from a consumer perspective, right? So let's talk about the consumer side. I mean, I kind of touched on the supply side because you really got to enhance or harness what you've got, educate the people to have the sense of pride about who they are and what they're about, because that's what makes them unique. The fact that they're from Sarawak, they've got, you know, we had a guessing game yesterday about how many indigenous tribes there are in the whole of Sarawak, and it didn't go down too well. So, but they now know there's 34, and from what I understood from a conversation yesterday with Shahzad, there's 7 primary that kind of represent the 34, which is so wonderful, and each and every one of them have something different. So that's an education from the supply side, and I think if we start early, in schools, in you know, we can even start from primary school to have people grow up with a sense of pride and understanding, right? But on the supply side, and I want to touch on this I'm quite passionate about this because we don't always have to cater to the consumers. I think I know my travel. The way I travel has changed quite dramatically over the last many years. And I now look to experience things that I haven't experienced before and that I don't know about. So travel is a huge educational process. I mean, whether you're 21, 60, 85, it really doesn't matter. I want to go away, experience something new and exciting, and then those are the things that will create these nostalgic sort of memories that will be there for a long time. So I touched on something that Natalie from Intrepid mentioned yesterday. We don't always have to say yes. You know, this is the way our country is. These are our cultures. These are our traditions. And I'd really like you to embrace it when you come and visit my country. This is what I'm about, you know. So, sorry, one last thing. One of the little guy, one of the students, Jong, said to me at the end of the session, he goes, Audra, I've got a question for you. Actually, it's more of a problem. So I'm Chinese of Hakka descent, and I have we have, you know, reunion dinners for Chinese New Year. And, you know, during our reunion dinners, it's very common for us to do dishes like steamed fish, all those symbolic dishes that's so rich in Chinese culture. He says, but I have my relatives from Australia that come over, and they have young children, and the young children just want burgers and pizzas. What do I do? And I thought, okay, how do I answer this question? Because obviously, from their perspective, they might not have grown up with the same education about their cultural background. So I thought and I went, okay, Jong, I want you to step up. I'm giving you a task. Step up and own your culture. And, you know, educate your relatives to say, when you come to my house, this is what we do, and we love it, and this is why we love it. And these are all the things about the Chinese culture that's so wonderful. And slowly win them over. And when I go to Australia, okay, I can do those things that you do. But for now, voila.
No, definitely.
I mean, do you mind if I add on a little bit? I mean, I think we're now also in terms of education facing, I mean, here in Sarawak certainly, the idea that people are getting further and further away from the food that they eat. And so gastronomy tourism, I think, highlights that food chain and an understanding of the produce that we have here, particularly in Borneo, that is completely unique. I mean, I think you've probably been eating it for the last few days. And this awareness of the environment around them. I mean, one of the initiatives that we're doing as part of the UNESCO, as our UNESCO membership, is to build a gastronomy center. And one of the elements of that is that there will be community gardens on the roof leading down to experimental space for chefs and cooks, heritage cooks, to really kind of exemplify that food chain, and that's obviously will be part of the tourism offering going forward for visitors to Kuching, but actually also for domestic tourists, for local residents, to really refamiliarize themselves with where our food comes from and what it is and what makes it unique, not just from a cultural perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. So I think, gastronomy tourism really feeds into every stage of the educational ladder.
No, that sounds fantastic. I'd love to come back when all that is finally finished.
Oh, well, you can come back in 3 years, hopefully. I'm sure there'll be a grand opening.
Fantastic. So, I think yesterday, the other day when you had a tour, so a lot of people actually had that educational aspect when they went on the tours, especially those that went on the gastronomy tour. So that's sort of an example of some of the initiatives. But let's go to this. Are there any other successful case studies or best practices where gastronomy tourism has effectively been harnessed for the potential benefits from farm to table?
I can give a couple of examples from the Creative Cities Network, because really this is the beauty for us of joining this network, that we're able to see what other cities are doing, gastronomy cities around the world. Probably the most successful, if I mention the name Parma, everybody will nod sagely. Parma are doing amazing things, really supporting their artisanal producers through a kind of combined tourism program. They call it the Meet the Producers tourism program. A little bit closer to Asia, I was able to visit Phetchaburi last year, which is a new city from Thailand that joined at the same time as us. And they're really curating their tours, their gastronomic tours at the same time as us. Each city in the network approaches in a very different way the idea of tourism, or actually the idea of their membership of the network, and not all are tourism based. But Phetchaburi are really seeing, very much like us in Kuching, tourism as being a secondary income or a support to their agricultural sector, and particularly the agricultural sector that is involved in heirloom crops or more sustainable agricultural forms. Tourism becomes a driver that will allow, here in Kuching, for example, or in Sarawak, people who are farming in an ancestral or a community manner to continue to do so into the next generation, rather than coming to town and finding a different way to live. So, I think this is a key theme here in Sarawak, which was really reflected in what I saw in Phetchaburi. They're bringing in farmers to run tourism products, not to replace what they're doing, but actually to support what they're doing. And to me, that's really the key. So for all the Thais in the audience, I will be stealing several of Phetchaburi's models going forward. And they had 3 different routes: sour, sweet, and salty. And you could experience a kind of flavor profile going through. And it was a very interesting model, but particularly how they approached the purpose of gastronomic tourism, I think.
I love the fact that the power of tourism sort of expanding into the farmers and getting them more involved. Any other examples?
Yeah, I was actually going to touch on Thailand as well, because Thailand is such a self-sufficient place. But the great thing, the wonderful thing about Thais is they're so they're actually very proud of who they are and what they do. And even if you talk about the Japanese, for instance, the craft, you get a Japanese chef. I've just gone back to Japan twice in the last 6 months, and had the wonderful experience in rural Japan of discussing and, through broken Japanese and broken English, somehow we communicated over beautiful food that, premises that were run for 40, 50, 60 years, and but they still want to do it, and they serve you the dishes, and they want to tell you all about the stories. And these stories are so precious. And, if you can build that within a community, and I might skip it and I might kind of move into the next topic about, sorry, I know.
No.
But it seems like a nice flow. I mean, if we can kind of harness recipes, Paul, recipes, age-old recipes, and have the pride of the farmers support that, or rather the recipes always derived from what they could grow back in the day anyway. So if we can actually support that, nurture that, and then give tourists or foreigners or travelers that experience, I mean, how wonderful would that be, And if we talk about where these recipes came from, definitely what we could grow at the time, but also from our grandmas, And I mean, whoever says, it was my grandfather's recipe, maybe 1 out of a million. I don't want to diss the grandfathers out there, but grandmas, right? I mean, who cooks from grandma's recipes here, Show of hands. There we go. We've got a few. We've got some proud lady back there. It's those recipes that are important, and the stories that come out of those recipes. And what I want to kind of get to here is also, women have a lot of stories. And if you bring put a bunch of women into a room, geez, you will not stop talking, because you will hear stories after stories after stories. So the sort of empowerment of women to kind of stand in front instead of behind and run some of these shows. Someone yesterday, I think it might have been Natalie again, speaking about women Sherpas, women guides and stuff like that, to actually showcase and talk about, tell their stories. It's a very different experience. Let's coexist, right? Yeah.
No. I mean, that was going to the next question. How does gastronomy tourism empower women and promote gender equality? But I mean, do you want to add to that in terms of?
I think I'm going to make this claim. I think there's a great deal of gender equality in our food chain in Sarawak, largely because of sort of traditional and historical systems, I suppose. In terms of agriculture, you're talking about a huge number of smallholders and community-led agriculture. And women have taken a huge role in that. And in terms of our urban food sector, there's a relatively simple entry to market in terms of our hawker systems and our street food. And lots of small family-run stalls which divide work between the genders. So yes, I think gastronomy tourism can actually amplify that, particularly if you're talking about community-based gastronomy tourism in the rural areas. You're then bringing in entire communities to collaborate on tourism projects. So, while they're farming, they're also cooking. It brings in handicrafts. So there's a whole range of activities that then become involved in a single tourism product built around food and agriculture. So yes, I think it's amplifying what's already here in Sarawak for me.
I just want to remind people, if you have any questions for our panelists, please do either go to slido.com and enter the code that you see here, or scan the QR code. Happy to take any questions for our panelists. Did you want to add anything further to that?
Yeah, I actually just want to mention, I quite agree with that, actually. Sarawak's quite an unusual example, and because it's so driven by passion rather than passion. Well, I guess a lot of things are driven by passion, need, and substance, But I met Jenny Dudu from the Anak Rai homestays, and I was so blown away by the things she was telling me about, and I so want to jump on a boat and go there now. But the fact that it's 4 women represented them, and how amazing is that they can tell the stories. And she was telling me a lot of stories. And the thing that I read this somewhere, so it's not mine, that women are the gatekeepers of traditions and cultures. And I just can't stress that enough.
Sorry, my apologies. I saw questions were in, but I had to review them and improve them. So, but just a couple more questions, and we'll try to get to some of these questions here. So, I'll just jump to this last one here. How can governments and local authorities support and promote sustainable food practices within the context of gastronomy tourism?
Sorry, what was the question? Governments
How can governments and local authorities support and promote sustainable food practices within the context of gastronomy tourism?
Right. Well, I can talk about this in a Kuching perspective, let's say. We have a number of initiatives going on right now in terms of sustainable food practices. I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier in the earlier conversation was about food waste. So I think we're looking at it here from, as you say, the consumer end. We've got very important initiatives going on in terms of plastic straws, single-use plastics. They're now banned in our markets and our hawker centres and in our festivals. Rainforest World Music Festival is going on now, and they've got a lot of sustainability initiatives for the food provision there. So in that sense, I think what I'm saying is there needs to be a kind of legislative and regulatory framework in terms of sustainability for F&B and for hygiene and all of that area. But then also there's, of course, the education and public awareness angle, either through bodies like throughout Tourism Board, or I think through, certainly our council is also doing a very good job telling people about sustainability initiatives that are going on and working with NGOs in the city.
I think they play a big part, Paul. I think if you allow people to their own device, unfortunately, being humans, maybe 7 out of 10 might take the easy route, the cheap route. Look, everybody's in it to make money. You can't live on love and fresh air alone. Let's be realistic about that. I remember speaking to quite a large hotel chain at one point, and we were talking about their sustainable practices, and because I was sort of giving them some advice on the food waste element, because the hotel industry is probably one of your biggest problem areas in terms of food waste. I mean, buffets are an absolute. It's a tough one. You want to feed hungry people, but you also don't want to overfeed and or have too much excess waste, right? And I said to her, why are you still having plastic bottles, blah 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 blah, and all that? She says, oh, it's it's a really expensive exercise. I said, I know. I said, but people are aware of it. Actually, that conversation started because a guest complained that there were all these extreme amounts of plastic that was lying around. And I said, well, you've got to start somewhere. Start small. Start with one thing, have a plan, and start rolling it out. But from a food perspective and from a preservation of culture perspective, I think, I like what Sarawak's doing is they are encouraging, they're embracing, they're getting communities involved in guiding them in making the right decisions. But I think it's still good for them to stay involved because, like I said, left to their own devices, it might not produce the results that you want. So if you have a framework that governs how these types of businesses need to be run, that when you're at the Longhouse, obviously you want to showcase the best of your cuisine and your tribe or whatever it might be. It's involvement, government involvement, and also from an education perspective, start educating the children from a young age, introduce it into their curriculum, take them outside of the classroom. Dr. Hiram Ting from UCSI, tomorrow he's taking his 36 students outside. They're going on a little excursion. They're going to go to all the cultural centers. They're going to tap into the food, and they're going to talk about what's important in how do you market this and why it's so unique to us. So there you go.
All right, we got a bunch of questions here. I think a lot of them have been voted on, so we'll go with the top ones that voted here. We got a little bit over 5 minutes, so let's try to get to as many as possible. The first question is, would gastronomy alone make people travel to a certain destination, or is it just a filler to their traveling plans?
Oh,
That's a really hard question.
can I go for that one?
Yes, you go ahead, yes.
Look, there's two types of people. People travel for different reasons, right? But it depends on the individual. I always travel for food. My family doesn't know this. When I actually organize our itineraries, it always revolves around food. And then I go, but I'll sneak it in. I think more and more people are doing that today. People used to travel and have, ticks in their boxes. Oh, yes, we want to go to the Eiffel Tower. Oh, yes, we want to go here. But now it's more, did you see that video on that person eating the most amazing, pastry or whatever it might be? So I think you cater for both, but it can always start with food, but on the peripheral you will experience everything else that you would want to experience.
Well, if we're talking personally, I'm the exact opposite to you.
Oh, see, I told you there was two types.
No, but I think we come to a commonality in the middle because I never travel for food, but food will make or break the destination for me.
But we will always meet for dinner afterwards.
Well, exactly.
Right?
So if I go somewhere that I've always wanted to go and it's very beautiful, but the food is not good, that's always going to be the final thing that I say. I think food is such an integral part of being human and being alive and surviving that any destination that doesn't provide some kind of gastronomic experience is going to suffer from that. Yeah. Whether food, farm-to-table gastronomy tourism is going to be the answer to everything, then no, I think it's a very niche market. But it certainly can be a really important and enlightening and enlivening part of any...
enhancing that experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is another question, very popular. Would some sort of recognition, i.e. Michelin star recognized standards, could help to promote local cuisine? Well, if like a Michelin star, so would that help promote the local cuisine?
Yes, but we can't forget. So if we talk about the Michelin star situation, here's the thing: not everybody can afford to go, to Michelin stars. But what I think should happen is that can definitely be a draw card, but then it should also encourage the rest or the remaining styles of food, whether it's street food or specialized, mid-tier restaurants or whatever. I guess the answer is yes, but you also have to feature the remaining restaurants, the remaining cuisine, the remaining strengths.
Actually, Michelin just came into Malaysia and caused quite a drama with their selection, I believe, and there was a lot of discussion on netizens that they'd got it all wrong and they didn't understand Asian food. That being said, one of the elements of our action plan for our UNESCO membership is to create or undergo a kind of benchmarking and branding exercise to identify Sarawak produce and give it some kind of recognition. Obviously, we're doing that at a kind of local level, and that's very much to promote foods, particularly from Sarawak, and to link them to this locale and this landscape. Not just food, but kind of practices, food practices also. So, yes, I believe it's very useful. But I agree with you entirely that it very much depends on what you're promoting through this award system, whether you're promoting sustainability or community involvement or high-end dining.
That's right. Actually, an example, Paul, I wrote it down before. there's a gentleman and there's a chef in Thailand, in Chiang Rai, called Chef Kong, and he runs this very small restaurant in Chiang Rai called Locust Native Food Lab. And what he does is he experiments with produce within, I reckon, a 3-kilometer region, or maybe slightly wider. I could be wrong. And he really showcases that to its nth degree and its value and stuff. And he has not had recognition for a long time. And finally, I think I think, you know, for most chefs, I mean, this guy charges a lot of money for his food, but for most chefs, the recognition comes when, for somehow or other, because it's an industry thing, when Michelin says you're amazing and you're number 1 on the list or you're number 2. But I think the recognition now opens up people's kind of views about, oh, let's go to Chiang Rai, because we've always really kind of mucked around Bangkok and, you know, those areas, because there's lots of restaurants there. But it's worth the trip out. But here's the thing, when you're going to his restaurant in Chiang Rai, all the experiences and the little places that you come across along the way, that's what makes the journey precious for travelers.
Yeah, I mean, besides the Michelin star, I know Michelin also does the bottom level too, with the Bib Gourmand, right, which is also nice recognition, right? So it's still good food, but at a reasonable price. I think we're almost out of time, but I do want to get this last question, because it's actually kind of something that was touched on upon in another question I had. So how can Sarawak minimize the risks of cultural appropriation and commercialization of traditional cuisines in gastronomy tourism, while ensuring respectful preservation and the benefit sharing of indigenous culinary traditions? And I would say that not just for Sarawak, but for any sort of destination.
That's a long question. Do you want to?
So just say, how do you minimize the risks of cultural appropriation and commercialization of traditional cuisines?
Yes, and this has been a big question that I've discussed with other creative cities, in fact.
We had a quick talk about that before, didn't we?
Exactly, and certainly, I mean, we are, when you talk about documentation and preservation of traditional cuisines, you're really looking at heritage knowledge holders and traditional knowledge holders, and you want to get them to share their abilities and their skills and their knowledge with you. I actually don't know the answer, and this is something that we're working on at the moment. And it's certainly I was having this conversation with people from Phuket in Thailand, because they're going through a very similar process. I mean, I think at the moment, in terms of commercialization, that's really something that we are aiming to do. In terms of sustainability of our traditional cuisine going forward, we need to create an income for people. And this is the reality of the world. I think the question you're asking, or the question that is being asked, is how do we ensure that the benefits of that knowledge go to the people who hold it originally? You know, I think in a community-based place like Kuching, where the ties are still very close, it's still relatively easy to do. It is something that we need to look out for going forward. And that's, I think, something that we are working on as UCCN Kuching, to really identify who the champions of our community are and ensure that they are getting some kind of intellectual property through it. I mean, I was having a discussion the other day with somebody. To be honest, I know that's not an answer, because I don't have one yet. It's a process that we're going through currently, how we ensure that traditional knowledge holders maintain their IPs.
Look, I think, so living in Sydney, you have a lot of cultures that exist in Sydney. And if we look at each person's recipe, say let's take 5 Greek families, 5 nonnas or 5 yayas. They all have their recipe. This is how my mother taught me. I was brought up in the southern part of Greece, whatever it might be, right? But you're right. When it's a small location, it's a lot easier to manage and maybe manageable. But commercialization, in some ways, we need commercialization to make money. We do. And like I said before, we cannot live on love and fresh air alone. So a lot of people, they've done is that they've turned their recipes and their traditional stuff into traditional practices into cookbooks, with their name at the bottom of it. That's maybe something that we could encourage more of. There's a lot of Asian cookbooks out there. There's a lot of Nonya cookbooks out there, a lot of Greek cookbooks out there. But it also gets stolen and misused, and it's unfortunately a reality of life. What's more important is the preservation of practices, right? The preservation of practices within some of the indigenous groups, within your culture, within the Hakka culture, the Hokkien culture. I think if that carries on for generations to come, then it's a beautiful thing. It's something that everybody can experience when they come and visit.
I mean, I do think, at the moment, because Sarawak is in a transitional period, really, the process of documentation is an interesting one, especially with gastronomy and culinary practices, because we're in the process of writing down a lot of these recipes for the first time. Our food practices have been handed down, usually, as you say, grandmother to mother to daughter. And actually, the creation of recipe books and the creation of, websites with food blogs, this is a very new thing. But I think the process of documentation itself provides recognition of where the communities that these recipes came from. And then from then on, it becomes a process of creativity within the local communities and how they want to bring that forward. But I'm actually hoping that the documentation process is part of allocating recognition to the communities that came up with these recipes.
I think we could talk forever.
Actually, Paul, one last thing.
All right,
just to tag onto that,
okay.
and something else you asked about before about government intervention and tourism boards and all that. I reckon it should be facilitated by them, because then it gets done, And as Karen said, these recipes are precious. They're really precious, and because of the way different tribes actually live their lives, it's very hard to. Not every, you still have that nomadic tribe, and it's difficult to get them to come to the party. So we go there, we go there, spend time with them, talk to them, understand them, document it. And that way, that's not lost.
The role of the government really plays an important part in that documentation process. We are way over time, so apologize, but I think we can go on forever. It's food. I mean, everyone loves food. So big round of applause to my panelists, Audra and Karen. Thank you so much. I wish we could get through all the questions. I know food is a topic on everyone's mind.